Welcome back to part 2 of our video on how North Korea and its leader pose perhaps one of the most serious threats to cryptocurrency. Last time we saw how North Korea, a backwards, repressed and insular country of just 26 million people, has managed to become a nuclear power in defiance of the rest of the world. In this part of the video, we'll learn how that's been possible through the use of another weapon most people wouldn't associate with North Korea at all: the internet. I'm also going to examine the shadowy group of hackers trained and operated by North Korea to steal vital funds for the regime, and how their efforts have resulted in billions of dollars worth of losses for the crypto industry. Now, if you've been following developments in the crypto space over the last couple of years, you'll have probably heard the term North Korean hackers mentioned a good many times in the crypto media and elsewhere. You may even be familiar with the name this hacking collective has been given: the Lazarus Group. It's this bunch of state-trained and funded hackers that have been behind some of the biggest and most audacious thefts in crypto, and whose ill-gotten gains eventually find their way back to their paymasters in Pyongyang. They're well-trained, well-resourced and highly skilled, and their exploits are costing the crypto industry dear. And what makes all this even more remarkable is that they hail from a country where most people have little or no access to the internet at all. So, how on earth have they become so proficient and so dangerous? Now, before we go on, I should give a shout out to one of the best sources of information about the Lazarus Group, which I highly suggest you check out after this if you want to hear more about this incredible story. Jeff White's book, The Lazarus Heist, is an absolutely enthralling read, and the accompanying podcast, which he co-presents with Gene Lee, is also not to be missed. So I'll leave links to both in the description, along with some other suggestions for further reading. The story of the Lazarus Group, as you'll hear, is an extraordinary one, and the history of North Korea is likewise a fascinating subject, and both are well worth digging into further. And now, back to the show. It won't surprise you to learn that North Korea is perhaps the least online society in the world. As we've seen, the Kim regime is terrified that its people might learn what life is like beyond North Korea's borders, and a tool like the internet is understandably one of its worst nightmares. North Korea isn't alone in censoring and restricting internet access, of course, its neighbour China being a good example, but the Hermit Kingdom takes it to another level. Only a handful of websites can be accessed on North Korea's internet, and they're all controlled by the state, like this English language version of Rodong Sinmun, the country's main newspaper and mouthpiece for the ruling Workers' Party. As you can see, if you're not keen on reading pieces about Kim Jong-il doing things, well, you're kind of out of luck. And that's if you're able to get online in the first place. Few North Koreans even have access to a computer, and using the internet on one is deemed a special privilege reserved only for an elite few. The average citizen most likely has little idea that the internet even exists. But you have to credit Kim Jong-un with one thing. He understands how fundamental the internet is to life in the outside world. He knows full well how reliant we all are on it for information, business, shopping, amusement, cat memes, etc., etc., etc. I mean, just try and imagine life without the internet. In fact, don't. It's too awful to contemplate. Now, the Kim regime has a twofold problem, though. How to keep acquiring all the luxuries those at the top of North Korean society have become accustomed to, and how to pay for the development, testing and maintenance of its nuclear weapons. As you can imagine, a nuclear program doesn't come cheap, even if it does offer a pretty firm guarantee that no one is going to invade your country. As you'll know, North Korea is heavily sanctioned, meaning the amount of trade it can engage in is pitiful, even if it were able to produce a surplus of anything worth trading. So, for years now, the Kims have had to get their funding by more unconventional means, and that means crime. Yup, locked out of the global economy and strapped for cash, North Korea long ago began dabbling in all sorts of criminal enterprises in order to earn valuable foreign income. When you read about some of the methods they resorted to, it can be a bit of a toss-up between being appalled at the cynicism of it all and applauding their ingenuity. For a long time, the counterfeiting of just about everything, from cigarettes to consumer goods to medicines to foreign currency, proved extremely lucrative. Indeed, the North Koreans became so good at forging US dollars, even experts from the US Treasury had trouble telling the moody notes from the legit ones. North Korea even turned its hand to manufacturing crystal meth, heroin and other narcotics, which were then distributed to foreign markets via a web of criminal gangs across Asia. But though these ventures were profitable, they were also relatively labour-intensive and could never be enough to satisfy the regime's appetite for luxuries and state-of-the-art weaponry. More lucrative forms of grift needed to be found. Now, as we all know, the internet is an amazing tool, but no one can deny it has its downsides. One of the biggest is the fact that it has opened up a whole new criminal frontier, one that law enforcement agencies across the world struggle to patrol effectively. Scammers, hackers and thieves of every stripe have flourished online, and their activities take a massive toll. In 2015, cybercrime was estimated to have cost the global economy $3 trillion. By 2025, that figure is expected to grow to over 10 trillion. Indeed, the problem of cybercrime is so acute that many believe it actually poses a greater threat to global security than nuclear weapons. One person who seems to appreciate this horrific potential, both to make money and wreak havoc, is, of course, our friend Kim Jong-il. So, to that end, North Korea actively seeks out its most promising young people and trains them to become hackers. Those who exhibit particular proficiency in maths are talent spotted and siphoned off to be trained in the dark arts of computer hacking, thereby joining the ranks of the privileged few able to use the internet. In North Korea's rigidly stratified society, where people's lives are shaped by a class system they have no control over, the opportunity to study at university and work for the regime can be the only way out of a life of poverty and hunger. They likely have no idea what the state has planned for them and, moreover, wouldn't be able to do much about it even if they did. These newly trained hackers are then sent abroad, most often to China, and put to work fighting in the ranks of their country's cyber army. This is how North Korea has built up an elite force of hackers who've been unleashed on the world to steal money and cause chaos on its behalf. This is the outfit now known as the Lazarus Group, apparently because the viruses they create are particularly hard to kill off. Lazarus being a biblical character who comes back from the dead, by the way. Now, the Lazarus Group's most famous exploits are its hacking of Sony Pictures in 2014 and the attempted theft of $1 billion from Bangladesh's central bank in 2016. The Sony Pictures hack was apparently in response to the release by Sony of a film called The Interview, which centered around a successful plot to assassinate Kim Jong-il.
You want us to kill the leader of North Korea?
Yes.
What?
Spoiler alert, they did, and the North Koreans weren't too happy about it. Now, the hack of Sony caused mayhem at the company. Its computer systems were offline for weeks, and the hackers dumped all the data they had stolen on the internet for all to see, including private emails, details of salaries, and sensitive employee information like social security numbers and addresses. Several Sony execs were forced to resign due to the somewhat unsavoury nature of some of their internal communications. All of this was an early indication of what North Korea's hacking collective were capable of. Emboldened by the success of the Sony hack and successful cyber thefts from banks in Ecuador and Vietnam, in 2016 the Lazarus Group went bigger. This involved hacking into the computers of the Central Bank of Bangladesh and, with meticulous planning, orchestrating the draining of almost $1 billion from Bangladesh Bank's account at the US Federal Reserve. This money was then sent to accounts that had been specially opened by the hackers in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. And it was only by chance that they weren't able to get away with the whole amount. A tiny spelling error in one transfer request and the fact that the address of the Philippines bank contained the name of a sanctioned Iranian ship were enough to raise the alarm, and the hackers were only able to get away with about $80 million. This money was then laundered through casinos in the Philippines and Macau, never to be seen again. Now, although most of the rest of the funds were recovered, the hack showed just what the Lazarus Group was capable of and, tellingly, showed them the inherent limitations of trying to steal from entities in the traditional financial system. That's because, while stealing money may be straightforward enough for the hackers, the tricky part comes after. Those ill-gotten gains need to be laundered in order to prevent the authorities from being able to recover them, and that is a tricky and time-consuming process. In order to launder the proceeds from the Bangladesh Bank heist, for instance, Lazarus members had to play baccarat in a Manila casino for days on end. Cash needs to be emptied from bank accounts and exchanged for more cash in order to render it untraceable. And when you start talking about millions upon millions of dollars, that cash begins to weigh an awful lot. There's also the ability of banks to reverse transactions and cooperate in order to recover funds. So, the theft from Bangladesh may have been huge, but North Korea only ended up seeing a fraction of the total sum stolen. The Lazarus Group needed to find a yet more efficient way to steal. Now, it's thought that the group's first use of cryptocurrency to this end was in 2017, when a ransomware program called WannaCry unleashed chaos on computer systems across the world. It's thought that over 300,000 computers in 150 countries were affected, and the spread of the virus was only halted when a computer expert in the UK managed to spot a kill switch in its code. Affected computers were locked and their users told to pay a ransom in Bitcoin in order to recover their files. Here in the UK, in fact, the systems of a number of NHS hospitals were affected, leading to cancelled operations and severe disruptions to other vital healthcare services. Although the discovery of the kill switch helped limit the damage, WannaCry marked a frightening change of tack in Lazarus's operations. By using crypto instead of stealing regular fiat currencies, they're able to move money much faster, and there's no way the transactions can be reversed, as happened with the Bangladesh bank heist. The issue of laundering the funds remains, but with the backing of an entire state, Lazarus's members are a lot more well-resourced than most hackers. Since then, North Korea's hackers have become more and more ubiquitous in the world of crypto crime. In fact, in December 2022, South Korea's main spy agency reported that the Lazarus Group has been responsible for the theft of $1.2 billion worth of crypto since 2017. They've been particularly busy in 2022, which also happens to have been, quote, the biggest year ever for hacking, according to Chainalysis, and are thought to be behind a string of DeFi hacks and exploits in just the last few months. These include the attacks on Axie Infinity's Ronin sidechain back in March, $622 million stolen, and on Harmony's Horizon Bridge in June, which netted them $100 million. In short, when a big hack goes down, there's a more than decent chance that North Korea is behind it. They have the motive and they have the means. Such are the concerns around Lazarus's activities, the US Treasury Department cited them as the primary factor in the sanctioning of the Tornado Cash mixing protocol in August this year. Now, this reaction by the US government to Lazarus's activities highlights the double-edged nature of the threat the group poses to all of us. Not only do the funds they steal help fund nuclear weapons in a volatile part of the world, but the thefts themselves lead to clampdowns that affect all of us. Although Tornado Cash was used to launder funds stolen by the group, the majority of its users were ordinary crypto holders who were motivated by privacy concerns, not criminal ambitions. So, the efforts to combat Kim Jong-un's hacking collective have consequences for legitimate crypto users too. As the crypto industry continues to develop, more and more money and man-hours will need to be spent on trying to keep the likes of the Lazarus group at bay. Hackers and cybercriminals are one of the great banes of modern life, and the damage they do extends far beyond crypto, of course. That said, this industry faces enough headwinds as it is, and if these huge hacking incidents continue, well, fewer and fewer people will feel comfortable using crypto. We're already battling hostile politicians, a lack of sensible regulation, greed, mismanagement and criminality from centralized exchanges and platforms, and a public image made worse by, well, all of the above. But from behind his arsenal of nuclear weapons over in the Hermit Kingdom, the little rocket man Kim Jong-un may just be the most dangerous adversary the crypto industry faces.